When it comes to strengthening the rotator cuff, you've probably seen movements like this where I have a band or a cable attached and I'm just kind of keeping my elbow pinned to the side and then kind of moving in and out of this movement. I've found when it comes to coaching athletes, even in person, it's hard to kind of drive intent with this. You see the elbow kind of carrying off to the side. You see them kind of sliding their elbow forward. They're kind of getting in this fast position because they're just trying to get done because there's not much value. They don't feel like it's very hard. When it comes to strengthening the rotator cuff, I want you to try some of these movements and see if we can approach it a little bit better. For one, we're gonna start with that same exact setup. So that same band, that same cable, whatever you have, but we're gonna hold isometrics with it. So I'm gonna position my chest about perpendicular away from where the band is attached here. And all I'm gonna think is keep that elbow pinned, but since there's not much movement involved, it's probably gonna be a lot easier for me to hold this. And I'm just gonna kind of step out. It's gonna get a little bit harder, and I can step back in. You can modulate this based off of your strength, the tension, the cable, whatever you have. But I'm just thinking about controlling this, stepping in, stepping out. And obviously we can get the other side as well with the same sort of thought process. So we're stepping out, keeping that elbow pin, keeping it in a straight line perpendicular from our body. But with this, we want to change the position of that shoulder. So when we get this sort of position, it's kind of hard to guide intent, but through isometrics, I can really capitalize on that. So what I mean by that is by holding this perpendicular setup away from the bar, the attachment, now instead of moving my hand, I'm gonna keep this fist driving straight ahead to 12 o'clock. I'm gonna turn my body. So now if I turn my body to 10 o'clock, you see how I got some rotation in that shoulder? I'm gonna turn a little bit further. Now I'm at 9 o'clock. I'm really challenging that position. And I'm just gonna kind of work around. Can even go in, same concept. Make it a little bit more challenging, step out, control. I'm moving my body instead of moving my hand through that motion, and you may find it may drive some intent. Maybe easier for you as a coach to coach as well when you tell people, hey, fist to 12 o'clock, turn to 10, turn to 9, but they're keeping their elbow and keeping their fist in the same exact spot. I do, though, like having rotation still involved when it comes to the rotator cuff. And this is one of those movements that I like to do. So I'm thinking about keeping that elbow parallel to the floor. And from here, I'm adding a little bit of this inward rotation, but I'm keeping that elbow where it's at. I'm not allowing it to dip. And from here, I'm opening and then going back up. But the big thing I'm looking for here is if you look from the side, if I drew a line from the lens to my elbow to my shoulder, I'm moving around my elbow. I'm not letting my elbow carry to get this position. It's almost like I'm sitting in on something. I'm sitting in on a tabletop and I'm just rotating around it. And if you're working with a client, an athlete that might not be able to get that through their mind, you can easily take a barbell or a box, whatever you may have, and just have them position their elbow in that same spot. And now from here, you're just kind of using it as a reference point to guide that rotation, to kind of keep them where they are so they're not compensating. So bands are great, but I love adding more of an input. Remember, strength is mobility. So strength training and progressing is a form of mobility training. So I love this split kneeling setup. It allows me to drive some intent through the hips. And I'm thinking, get my hips underneath me, go into that posterior pelvic tilt, almost like I'm trying to shoot my butthole out in front of me. Abs tight, ribs down, and from here, I'm on that 45-degree angle. So if I'm facing 12 o'clock, my elbow is kind of 45 degrees away. And I'm just pressing up with control, controlling down. If you don't have a kettlebell, you can use a barbell for a landmine, a dumbbell, whatever it is. But I really like this bottoms up position for the stability we get and also the recruitment and the involvement of what's going on with the elbow. Back to those isometrics, we can get a lot out of that rotator cuff through open chained exercises. So what does that mean? That means I don't have this closed fixation to the ground or the wall, whatever it is. I'm holding stability with this kettlebell overhead. And it's even a little bit more because I'm in this bottoms up position. So there's a little bit of stability involved. I like to, if I'm facing the camera right away in this, I like to be 45 degrees off. And from here, I'm just gonna walk, holding the stability of this position. Whatever you prescribed, whether 10, 20 feet, whatever it is, but I'm holding that stability. You're gonna feel that rotator cuff light up because it's like, oh, it's fighting stability. There's strength involved. I got some grip. I'm connecting all the dots with this movement. But I really love, we call these bottoms up suitcase carries, just for challenging that rotator cuff. Just walking, nice and easy. If you don't have a kettlebell, you can use a dumbbell, whatever it is, but I do like that bottoms up position for the added stability component. Lastly, I know we don't think about closed chain movements or push-up type positions when it comes to the rotator cuff, but it's very much so involved. So all this band stuff is great, the kettlebell stuff is great, but sometimes I'll even go right to closed chain movements because it allows athletes to connect the dot and it might feel a little bit more natural. If I have someone doing something like we're gonna call a shoulder airplane here, this might be pretty easy for an athlete to move through. Think about the rotation that's occurring in that shoulder joint. I'm really challenging rotation. I'm really challenging that rotator cuff to hold that position. And this might be a pretty easy position for them to get through rather than a band or something where it might feel cumbersome or hard to move through, where closed chain movements are a great answer. So I think it's not one is better, but they're all applicable and useful when programmed appropriately. Remember, we have the banded movements controlling that tension. We have the upside down kettlebell, so we have some stability involved, and then closed chain movements using the ground as a stability point to challenge that rotation of that shoulder joint.